Okay, I guess we're live. Um, yeah, today with me is a Christian anarchist. He wanted to have a discussion with me on creation, the what is it, the literal interpretation of creation, or the more quote unquote scientific view. So maybe do you have anything to say? You
Well,
want to say?
I wouldn't call my view necessarily scientific, just a different uh, creation perspective, and that there's more than just one or two of them.
Yeah, that's right. And you take your view from the Bible, if I'm not mistaken.
hmm
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So you're not going by what the scientists say. That's not so bad.
I can look at some of the science and make conclusions, as William Lane Craig stated. He says Christians should be open to evidence and let the evidence lead them to where it leads. Um, and he has, of course, come to the conclusion of intelligent design, but based on my perspective and reading the lens through the Bible, I come to my view of what I would call evolutionary creationism.
Okay. So it kind of confuses me because I'm not sure at what point that things started to supposedly evolve, and like, for example, the 6 days of creation. What do you think about the 6 days of creation?
Well, the Hebrew word for day is yam, and it usually has a lot of different meanings. Like it means day, month, year, century, decade, long period of time. It means a bunch of different things. Old Earth creationists that believe in like a progressive creation, which is definitely a famous gap theory. Um, Basically says that those days are in fact long period of times, and one of the things that they point out too is that on the seventh day, when it mentions the seventh day, there's no evening and morning formula, so suggesting that we're still in the seventh day, that the seventh day is still in progress to them. But my view is that I think that those days might be 24-hour period days, but that they're not being used in the sense of trying to um, explain as a scientific of God actually making things in 24-hour periods. That it's kind of like there's a Bible verse where I think it's the Lord's arm was with the people of Israel. It's using a real literal thing for the word arm, but it's not a literal Lord's arm with Israel because the Lord doesn't have body parts. So instead, I think the dead days are being used in a sense to describe something.
But that the Lord was actually with Israel.
Oh yes, I mean we can't get rid of the truth that that's what it means, but it's not saying that the people of Israel literally had one of God's arms.
Yeah. Okay. Because the way I understand the first 6 days is that there were 24-hour periods based on the evening and morning,
hmm
and that there never was an evolution because evolution is not something that's possible. I don't see it being possible at all.
Well, they did back then also say that resurrections and miracles were impossible, but hey, Lord proves them wrong on that one. I mean, that's just how I look at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, you can make evolution happen, but it has to be being made happen, and I don't see God making objects do things they don't do, or chemicals or molecules. They have their set reactions that they make, and elements can only be whatever they're forced to be, and they can only do what they're significantly sequenced and ordered to do, basically. And I don't see any possible way for there to be any other information to be any other thing other than what's in the genome.
Right. I mean, and you're familiar with the intelligent design movement, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're arguing intelligence. Yeah, yeah.
But there's two members on the movement that actually would identify as theistic evolutionists, but they still believe in intelligent design is what the evolution process is. They just believe that the Darwinian model has things that were proven faulty, like Michael Behe is the guy who proposed the idea of irreducible complexity. He believes that common ancestry is scientifically accurate and that we're able to adapt and eventually get to what would be considered macroevolution. The problem that he has with the Darwinian model is that evolution is impossible on a molecular level. That he thinks it's impossible for the molecules to evolve from somewhere instantaneously, and that the molecules themselves can't evolve. They have to be guided and they have to be directly tampered with by an intelligent designer.
So as you mean, as working parts or as essential components of the biological form, they had to have been designed that way, you said?
Like the starting point, first it had to have been created because the molecule is the starting point. It had to have been created so that it could start. And then to help it go to God's plan, his path, he had to tinker with it and work on it during the way, such as I think would be the argument of his irreducible complexity with things such as the bacterium flagellum.
Well, but in a sense, though, I thought more that he was talking on more on the lines. I mean, I know there's chemical evolution, but there's biological, supposed evolution.
Right.
But I don't see how any chemicals can rearrange themselves or reprogram themselves to be something entirely different, because we see variation all the time, which is a basically, what do you call it? It mixes up the same information, a recombination.
Well, sometimes that depending on the outcome, well, I mean, that's the other thing. We have to also be careful on how Christians define the term information, because whenever someone asks Richard Dawkins about something about new genetic information, Dawkins, the reason why he stuttered in the interview is because he said that was a question that only a creationist would ever ask. And I think we do need to be careful on how we define information. And some guy explained that what we talk about is like what creates, white hair or the yellow hair that's on your leopard picture right now. But basically all these different DNA codes that determine what we have, the human genome, basically, it can change based on the copying that happens in the cell, and some mutations can cause a very complete different set of genes and DNA and links. Sometimes the mutations can be bad, but sometimes they can be for the positive. And I think one of my positives was my autism kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see variation happen, but what they're trying to say is that the mutations affect the variations. That's what they're trying to prove now. Is the only way they can get evolution is if the mutations themselves are causing some kind of a variation.
Well, if the mutation manages to be a favored trait, as the neo-Darwinists would say, like if the person that had the mutation managed to reproduce with somebody, and if you know anything on the dominant and recessive traits, according to a Gregor Mendel study, if the trait gets passed on, it can be dominant and can definitely be passed on, but then there's also recessive traits which might not be visible, but that can be passed down the generation later. For example, my stepmom's family comes from a line of place where gray hair can come quick in the family. And that's when they start using forms of hair dye. And it's a genetic thing that it happens at a young age, but sometimes it can skip the generation.
Yeah.
And sometimes, but most of the times it's always going to be that whole thing.
Yeah, I've known people, and my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, had white hair from a young age, and my father not so much. So, but
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of all that I think it's. I think if we look at the concept more logically, and I think even the atheist evolutionists themselves are taking things too out of proportion. Like sometimes they in themselves, though they speak about evolution, they don't understand evolution. Like an article came about from the National Center for Science Education that the most evolutionary biologists are actually theists, and that the atheists are a minority, and that they need to step down, and that the theistic evolutionists that are in the majority of the evolutionary biologist population, they need to speak up and be the representations, because they actually give a more accurate understanding of what evolution is, apparently. So there's a group that actually feels the atheists are embarrassing the theory of evolution.
yeah, they are. But I mean, my question is, I don't understand as far as theistic evolution. I don't understand where that took place if there was a global flood. Do you believe in a global flood?
I believe in a local flood because because there's a Bible trend because that's the common misconception I get, is that when I read the Bible and actually learn the Hebrew for it, that there's a passage where it covers the highest mountains and flooded the earth. Earth has one of those words that has more than two. It has more than one meaning. There's the earth as in the planet, but when it mentions that, that's a plural form. And the second meaning for earth, if you've seen if you've seen Avatar, there's the earthbenders. It basically just means that they bend and could control the ground and the dirt and all that. So that's where I see it, is it covered the land, basically.
Okay, it was a different sort of world before the flood. It wasn't really this identical to what we have today. So today's Earth has been destroyed once already. It's basically what's left over. Okay, I guess we might as well get down to the evidence of the flood. Is basically every land area, every continent is the result of the global flood that buried the fossils.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you see the fossils happening before Adam and Eve, or how does that work?
I can't really make the determination on the fossils. Like, to me, I don't really look into fossils because I'm not into paleontology that much. I look more into genetics. That's my main focus.
Okay, so by genetics, you would compare things, make things comparable.
Oh yes.
Even though the result is very different, the outcome is very different. You would compare the genome.
Like our genomes are different with all the different creatures, and that's the thing. That's how we become unique. Is that our DNA sequence is definitely different.
Yeah, I would say so too. Yeah.
But a
lot of the proteins are the same and stuff, though.
Right. And that's how we usually find senses of the common ancestries, by trying to determine in the DNA what similarities we have in our DNA compared to others. And we can only get it down to a percent. Like we can share some relations with possibly trees, but for something like that, that's a very low percentile because we only share so little with things like trees and all that stuff. Doesn't mean we came from a tree, though.
Right. Proteins are basically proteins, and we use proteins from trees, or in the case of eating animals, we use animal protein.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
but it doesn't mean that we're from a tree or from another animal. It's because the problem I have is the lack of being able to come up with the directives that you said information. You don't like so much the word information, but the directives to make the different characteristics or different kinds of body parts and stuff. I just don't see it being viable through mutations. Unrelated mutations aren't going to program, and they're not going to direct anything. They're not going to.
And right, like I mentioned earlier, I'm no scientist. I'm just going by an aspect, and all I should figure out is the philosophy that I go by when it comes to it. Because I see if such a mutation thing helps out somebody, I can see that being the case with me, because I have autism, which is something that would consider me not normal, but I enjoy it. I enjoy my autism because it helps me have a different way of thinking, and I think it's honestly helped me with my Christianity
So,
and me coming to rationality conversations with people. I'm very calm and mellow at times when it comes to it.
so do you visualize things, or you have a good memory and good math skills or something?
No, I'm not a. I'm terrible when it comes to math, and I'm not a visual thinker like Temple Grandin. I do need a visual to visualize certain things. Like if I'm reading, I need to visualize what the people look like. I need to have a certain picture. For the setting, I need something that I remember from my real life, and then I have to visualize, or else I'm not going to comprehend what I'm reading if I don't have something to visualize.
Oh, okay.
So that's why when it comes
Yeah.
to the Bible, I like to look up different Bible uh, books or movies to get a picture of what the characters like Samson or whoever looks like.
Yeah, I was just mostly distracted, easily distracted. My thoughts go there, go down a track and they just keep on going. So, and that's why I like science, that's basically why I like science. I just keep going down the thought trail, the thought path.
Mhm.
And you keep adding to it. Whatever you learn, you keep adding on. Like a lot of people, they don't understand Bible teaching because they never started with a foundation, the basis, and they never just kept on adding on to it. Because the more you build on the foundation, the more you're able to comprehend, and if you don't have the foundation, you're never going to comprehend, miracles or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, but back to the evidence of the flood. Okay, so do you, I don't know. You didn't really answer whether or not. Oh, you didn't know whether or not the dinosaurs were lived before Adam and Eve or while they were living. But how,
I
how
th-
about the? Oh, go ahead.
I think they lived before uh, Adam and Eve, and then at some point that they ended up dying. Like I believe, here's my point of view on Adam and Eve. That if someone tries to wants me to explain it to them, this is how I put it. I believe that God created His creation, and it of course was guided by His evolutionary process that He not only knew the plans and made in the first place, but if anything would quote unquote go wrong, He would go and fix things and make sure everything went according to his plan, because God has plans for all of us, and he's laid plans for all of his creation, in my view. And
So,
whenever man comes in the picture, it's a special creation, that we are to be the special, distinct, made in the image of God, to look after the creation, because it says in the Bible that we are to be good stewards of creation and earth. But we
so,
sinned.
so you think it was a directed evolution before Adam and Eve, maybe?
I'm not. I'm. That's the thing. I think it is, but I can't be sure because I'm not exactly in that aspect of God. And if I go to heaven, then I'm going to ask him that question if I can. If I can't, then he's God. He has the absolute authority to deny my request to him.
Okay, about the global flood, are you aware of the amount of deposited consecutive layers of water deposited sediments that buried the fossils around the world? Do you have any idea what that is?
I don't exactly know what that is. No, sorry.
Well, like for example, if you look at the Grand Canyon, is a good example to see what I'm talking about. Is that you can look straight down a mile down, and you can see nothing but consecutive layers, one stacked up on top of the edge of water deposited sediments with marine life in every one of those layers except for the top layers. And that's basically what exists around the world, around the globe, except with with the exception of some pockets where there's igneous rock coming up through the sediment layers.
Hmm.
So you're familiar with that?
Well, like I said earlier, I wasn't familiar with it. It's just, but yeah, you told me about it. I mean, like
Yeah.
all I go by is how the Bible depicted the concept of the flood. And as I mentioned earlier, when it says that the waters covered the highest mountains, um, I wouldn't say I'd know how high the mountains were specifically, but also when it says the earth, it doesn't. I don't think it's talking about the entire globe of the earth, because um, it doesn't specify that there's other creatures or humans in like South Africa or America, that they're just in that one specific region. So to me, it makes logical sense to come to the conclusion of B, that the other definition is the earth means land, besides the definition of the globe, since it's not using a plural noun but a common noun for the term, and therefore I come to the conclusion that it's flooding that specific land, and that's all that was flooded. But still, a lot of people died because of it. So God's will was still carried out.
Yeah, well, the problem that we have is that, well, not only does the Bible say it covers the highest peak and it killed every land, every animal, every human. It's the evidence is right there in front of us of the sediments that were deposited that made the fossils of everything that was living at the time, which if there was no sediment layers, there would be basically no continents, because the continents consist, including Antarctica, consist of the water deposited sediment layers that were put down by the global flood, because there's the only thing that can put down water deposited sediment layers is water, a lot of water. And the fact that it's a mile deep, some places 2 miles deep, is very indicative of a global flood, and I don't even see how you can get around it.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there's William Lane Craig says the way he came to his conclusions is that he followed the scientific evidence where it led, and there's you say that for that case, but another Christian named McKay H says that the Grand Canyon disproves a young Earth. So you say the Grand Canyon would, based on deposits, leads to evidence of young Earth, but she's proposing something entirely different, and she's even made a video explaining this topic.
Yeah, I'm specifically talking about the global flood, whether or not the Earth was young or not or old.
Right.
There's still a
She's referring to
huge
like she's referring to the age of the thing
of the flood, which was like about 5,000 years ago at the most.
and she's saying is like millions of years.
Which doesn't even make sense because 50 million years would have washed all the sediments into the ocean by now, and at the rates of erosion that we have, it just doesn't make any sense. Vast amounts of time doesn't help the situation any. It makes it worse, actually.
Well, how does vast amounts of time make things worse?
Because it would wash all the land into the ocean. The sediment layers wouldn't be there after 50 million years, and they're still there from the global flood.
Well, how will we know that they wouldn't be there?
Because at the rates of erosion, current rates of erosion, they've estimated they would all be gone in 50 million years. The estimates vary. They vary, but it's about 50 million years.
Well, how do we know that the current rates were the exact same current rates as they were back then? I mean, we're living in definitely a different form of society where we're using a lot of cheap fuel. We're even burning fossils for fuel these days. We've definitely gotten a little lazy with the cars that produce gas, and we got all these different things that basically are draining the environment of their resources, such as trees and all that stuff. So, I mean, is it possible that the rate could be different based on how the environment is in its state?
Well, I mean, basic wind water erosion that we have now, the measured amounts of sediment going into the ocean would deplete all the sediments in 50 million years. It's because the thing is that time doesn't help evolution, because the more time you have, the more chance there is to corrupt any proteins or amino acids or directives, written directives. The more, it doesn't really help the situation at all. I don't see.
Well, I mean, when you say it like that, are you trying to say that when evolution is suggested, it's got an agenda behind it?
No, just the actual process of supposed evolution isn't benefited by deep time, because deep time destroys amino acids and proteins and all that. And while you're waiting for a life form to make itself, it's going to deteriorate. It's going to self-destruct, basically, or be destructed by the elements before it ever forms by chance, by whatever random chance. Of course, but you believe in some kind of creation.
Yeah, like I will never go to the atheistic naturalist perspective. That's just straight out material, because that's the evolution that I agree is impossible. That there has, based on what we know about origins so far, and a bold new theory of life, where apparently this new theory that's being proposed by an Orthodox Jew, who's a theoretical physicist at MIT, is basically suggesting that life was bound to happen, and that it was basically, it was going to happen sometime later. It was not going to be. It was never going to be impossible for life.
Right, but evolution from one thing another has the same problem as abiogenesis, because it's missing the directives. Both abiogenesis is missing the written directives, and evolution is missing written directives to be something other than what it is. It's basically, in order to become something else, it's got to go through a process of being transformed, and remain viable, and going through these steps to become something that it's not, something other than what it is. And there's no way that any random unrelated mutations can make a symmetrical uniform transformation of thing. It has to be designed, it has to be created for it to be, something that it's not. For example, wings and all kind of stuff that different animals have different characteristics that others don't have. It's just completely absurd,
Hey, would it be cool if I invited somebody here, or I don't know if you were still wanting more people?
Sure, you can invite, as long as they're well comported.
Yeah, she's been considered, this person I'm inviting has been considered a female Rob Bell of some sort. She just gets branded as a heretic, though she's not a universalist.
Okay.
Hello, Deidre.
Hey, are we live?
Yes,
Live already.
we're live, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the discussion is theistic evolution, more or less, and or just straight up creation.
And that's the difference that I definitely try to make. I don't like the term theistic evolution because I think a lot of people don't know what theist is. So I just use the term evolutionary creationist because a creationist just means that you believe God created the universe, and that's all it means. But when people use it today, they automatically assume young Earth creationist. So I basically try to hijack the term and give it back to its original purpose by making it evolutionary creationist instead.
I don't have a problem with theistic. I have a problem with evolution. Evolution kind of like scratching on blackboards. So,
But anyways,
yeah. My question was about the evidence of the global flood, which would be sediments 1.5 miles, 2 miles deep around the world, which is kind of like impossible without a global flood.
But like I said, I'm not a scientist, so I don't really try to go based on that. I go by what the Bible's considered on the topic of the flood. And if I can try to find the Bible passage where it states that the flood starts happening.
Well, yeah, according to the Bible, it's if you count the generations, it's something like 4,400 some years ago when the flood happened. According to secular history and calendars, it's more like 5,000 years ago. And
well, I don't think we can really determine the age of the event due to the books doesn't even have a date on it compared to the other ones.
Right. Well, the Bible, it's possible that there's names missing in the genealogies, so it could take it back farther.
But even with the genealogies we have, we might not even have an accurate understanding of it. And a perfect example that I would point out is, have you ever heard of a Christian apologist by the name of Inspiring Philosophy?
I've seen it, yeah, I've seen it.
There's one thing that he made concerning the concept and the idea of the Christianity versus evolution, and in that series he quotes, he deals with the topic of the genealogies, and then he quotes a book, a thing from K.A. Kitchen on the reliability of the Old Testament, saying that within Hebrew-related tradition, such as the father-to-son sequences that we see in the genealogies, they can represent the actual facts of life, or they can be a condensation from an originally longer series of generations. And a good example is Matthew chapter 1, verse 8, where it says, Asa begot Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat begot Joram, and Joram begot Uzziah. And then in 2 Kings, it says the same exact genealogy, except it's now Asa begot Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat begot Joram, and Joram begot Ahaziah, Ahaziah begot Josh, Josh begot Amaziah, and Amaziah begot Uzziah. So in Matthew 1:8 it said Joram begot Uzziah, but in 2 Kings it says Amaziah begot Uzziah.
Right.
So
Which would be something they would have understood at the time, but it's kind of hard for us to understand.
right, so that same thing could happen, and they could be actually longer generations when we're looking at the genealogies in Genesis.
Right. And another thing that could have happened is that the secular calendars could have began with the birth of Noah, because that's 500 years before the flood. 500, 600, 500 years, something like that. 500 years before the flood. So I mean, that's another possibility, I would think. But like you say, there's the genealogy might be missing some people.
Mm-hmm. And right, that's the only thing I say, and that's where I say think, because I can't make an absolute claim unless given more evidence on the topic, and that's why we're still looking for things like new manuscripts for confirming and making more accurate translations of the Bible.
Yeah, but there's a general consensus. I mean, consensus between the records, the secular records, and the biblical records, in that it's not that far apart. I mean, you're only talking about 5,000 years maximum of human history since the global flood, when all of the civilizations began, including Egypt, the China, Hindu, Mayan. They're all the same ages, basically. They all began at the same time.
Yeah. So, but my question is that where in the Bible does it indicate that if something is earth, because that's where what the Bible says is that the water covers the earth. How do we know that this is referring to the globe Earth and not just the land Earth?
Well, apart from the fact that everything was killed, animals, land, animals, people, and everything that was breathing through the nose, was killed by the flood.
The penguins?
Penguins swim.
The platypuses?
Platypuses swim. And
Kangaroos?
kangaroos. Well, basically, see, that's another thing, is that I'm of the persuasion that the continent split up 100 years after the global flood, because of the fact that the sediment layers are consistent between the continents, that they probably split apart after the sediments were deposited.
Don't you think that would have been so catastrophic that the world wouldn't survive if it happened that quickly?
No, because
like, wait, what would happen?
Portion, the people were basically
tectonic plates and stuff being affected by the flood, and then it would cause the continents to split, and I would think that would be so disastrous that the world as we know it would really not exist.
They were basically, the people were basically isolated to the area of Turkey at the time. They didn't start spreading out until after the 100 years. Then that's when they started spreading out. So they were basically isolated from the catastrophe that happened. But like the jaguar and the leopard, the jaguars are native to South America. The leopard is native to Africa, but they're both compatible creatures. They're both the same creature, actually. Both the same thing. And for a while, the South America was still connected to Antarctica, and Antarctica was warm weather, had tropical weather at one time, or at least temperate weather. Had bugs and moss. So there's a lot of things to consider. You know, There's-
Right, but this is again where I don't know. You said that the Earth or the continents they were all the same, and they were together. That it took 100 years till the uh, tectonic plates started to break and shift, right?
right, because it basically hardened, but I think there was also an impact from an asteroid might have caused the separation to break up, caused the breakup.
And but however, wouldn't there have been a recording of this in the Bible itself?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's from the Bible that says that the earth was divided in the days of Peleg, and then he was actually named for the dividing, for the division.
And who was this?
Peleg.
Where in the Bible is this? That's what I meant to say.
Well, it's just before the Tower of Babel, when people started speaking different languages.
Is the
That's
Tower of Babel literal with you too? Just double checking.
Yes, it was a. That's what I'm saying. They all concentrated in the same area. They didn't want to spread out. They wanted to stay together, and they only spread out after the languages got confused. Then that's when they spread out after the 100 years.
So Genesis 10:25, Peleg days, the earth was divided. That's what you're citing, Genesis 10:25.
Yeah. Most creationists, most young Earth creationists don't agree with it. They think that the split happened before, but I don't see that being consistent with the sediment layers between the continents being similar.
You don't
Well,
think that would be a symbolic dividing and a symbolic story?
Yeah, that's what they say. They say that the Earth dividing, they said that refers to the people dividing, but I don't see that being the case either.
I think that the passage is more of uh, the Tower of Babel is a parable concerning the people wanting to be like God in the sense that they actually would not want to build a castle and go to Him, but God is angry with this concept and idea. And so, in order to show His Godhead, He would separate them and confuse their language. And probably that's why we have different languages, is that God doesn't want it to be easy for us to communicate with each other so that this kind of thing could happen. Because if we all spoke the same language, then it's possible that we could start thinking we're God and that we could work together to try to achieve and be with God because we think we deserve.
Better watch out for Google Translate.
I think the main problem is like she's saying that we have Google Translate now. We can understand anything anybody's saying now, and we're accomplishing just about anything we want today, regardless. But
I can tell you that
the main problem. Let me just finish the thought here before I forget it. The main problem is that it interfered with God's plan to bring Messiah into the world. I don't see any. I think that to me that's the most important thing, is that it would have been not possible to bring Messiah into the world, the way God planned.
So if evolutionary creationism is true, then it would ruin the chance of the Messiah.
No, I'm talking about the people staying together. The people not wanting to separate, because basically what they were doing then we're doing now, but Messiah has already come. God has already finished His plan as far as mankind is concerned, so it really doesn't matter at this point,
Right.
Because it's already been finished, God's plan, God's purpose.
Indeed. And I would like to point out that Google Translate thing is just absolute retarded. I've tried translating something on there to speak to my German friend. He asked
Right.
he asked what language was I speaking, because he said that thing didn't translate German.
Right.
Mm,
Right, because you have to understand the language basically before, but in
yeah.
order to use it.
Yeah, you
No,
can't put it in the way we talk, you know.
yeah,
Right, and you can't use the way we talk either. You have to talk the way they talk, the phrases they use, and otherwise it'll just come out all wrong.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, my view is concerning the issue is that we can agree to disagree, because I don't see it's going to um, interfere with our view on salvation, Jesus Christ, who is the Messiah that came to die for our sins, because we're all sinners, because we inherited that sin from Adam and Eve, from the fall. And that's basically my view entirely, even if it's still have evolutionary creationism in my beliefs. I think that we all just need to focus on Christian doctrine and the essentials when it comes to that, but when it comes to things like science, it's more of a personal thing. I made a video concerning how to deal with the young and old Earth debate, where first I showed how you don't do it is be like Nephilim free, eating paper, and making that as what evolutionists do. And then I pointed a video quote from John Sanford, who was a young Earth creationist. Are you familiar with him?
Not too many. No.
He was quoted a couple times by Kent Hovind as the young Earth creationist who invented the gene gun, basically. And in the video that I post, he states that the devil wants to see young and old Earth people fight, and so far he's doing a good job, since young Earth creationists and old Earth creationists are fighting with each other and insulting one another, and says we need to reconcile each other, our differences, and uh, find the things that we share similar with and focus more on those, and not the things that are dividing us too much.
Yeah, I agree, we need to come to realize and understand what the evidence is and what it means, and we need to be all on the same page. I agree with that.
Well, he's not
No,
saying. Well, he's not saying like we all need to come to a young Earth or any of that. He's just saying that we all need to, if we're all Christians, even if we're young or old Earth, we need to accept that there was a literal Adam and Eve, that there was a Jesus Christ who came to die for our sins, and that we're all sinners in need of a Savior.
Right. That's basic salvation plan.
Hmm. You were about to say something, Deidre, before I rudely interrupted you.
no, I mean, we agree on the essentials. I don't even know if literal Adam and Eve is essential as much as that there was a fall of some sort.
Well, you had to admit that there was like a first man and woman,
Interaction.
right?
Yeah, there would be some sort of starting point, but at what point, with theistic evolution, that's where we kind of all argue, like at what point, is Adam and Eve representative, or are they the only ones? There's a lot of different ways to go about it, but either way, I do believe that there's original sin, and that man was given a choice, and I think if you put anybody in that position of Adam and Eve, we probably would all make the same dopey choice, to be honest. I think we would all choose to go, well, I want to know what God knows. I want to know what, I have a feeling that we'd all be too tempted to,
Well, we'd probably
eat of
wait
the
a
fruit,
week.
so to speak.
We might wait a week, but then eventually we might get curious or something.
So I trust that God, if God used Adam and Eve as our best representative, as some people figure, if he took the best of us at the time, I don't think God would take the worst of us, and the person that's weakest. I think even if you took the very best human being of all time, I think we would all pretty much partake in the fruit. I really do. Um,
We
so
all
so I believe in the fall.
participate.
Yeah, and I think if we can agree on the essentials, like the God of the Old Testament is the same God as the God is in the New Testament, that the Trinity, Christ's atonement, if we can agree on essentials like that, I think then we can move forward and call each other brother and sister. So I'm not really sure. mm, I told Christian Arcus I'm a little dispassionate on creationism. I am dispassionate on evolution as well. I care about the here and now and what's happening in the future a lot more than what happened in the past.
So you're not much into history or historian type of stuff, right?
I like history as history is important as we don't want to repeat it, and
Mhm.
sadly, history tends to repeat itself.
It's
But
kind of irrelevant to what we're doing right now, what we have to
mhm,
do right now. The Bible makes the comparison of Christ being the second Adam. When Adam was made, he was made first, and then Eve was taken out of Adam. This is very, very extremely significant because of the fact that Eve was a part of Adam. And so when Eve then sinned, that was basically Adam sinning anyway. But the importance is that in order to have a covering, a provision for Adam, the provision had to be first in Adam. In other words, the provision of Christ had to be first in Adam, then was taken out of Adam and put into Eve, or made when Eve was made. So that when they sinned, that was when the first word of the provision for sin came, in that the seed of the woman, which was in Adam, would crush the serpent's head, which would take care of sin. But it would have to be, so in other words, it covers both Adam and Eve. The provision that's the seed of the woman covers Adam and Eve together. To me, that's very significant.
I feel like that's a little stretchy, but I see where you're pulling that out of. I mean, obviously in Corinthians it does talk about Adam. Adam became the living being, and it compares Adam and Christ, Christ as the, I think it's Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 15 in chapter 15. It compares Adam as the living as the first living person, and then it compares Christ as a living, giving spirit.
Yeah, life-giving spirit. Yeah.
So there's a lot of compare and contrast. I mean, we see that all throughout, the New Testament. It takes from the Old Testament, compares and contrasts. And so, yeah, there's significance in it. I don't know if I would take it as far as you did, but yeah.
Because when he made all the other animals, he made them male and female, male and female. But when it came to Adam, he made Adam first, and then took a rib out and made Eve. To me, there's got to be a reason for that, and that seems to be the reason, is that the seed of the woman, the provision for the sin of Adam and Eve, was originally in Adam and then in Eve, and it covers everyone. And of course, the Bible also says that we were in Adam. We sinned in Adam. We were all in Adam when they sinned, because we're genetically from them.
We're genetic from them, but I think if you took any human being and you replaced any of us and said, "Well, jungle jargon, you try it." If you put you and someone else into the garden, I do think that we'd all
Yeah.
fall prey to temptation.
Yeah,
So
of course. Yeah, I agree.
a lot of people talk about like what an idiot Adam is or what an idiot Eve is, but I think honestly we all would probably fall prey to the temptation.
Yeah. Well, because we would, because we're born in sin. I mean, we were a part of Adam. We could have objected, I suppose, but we probably didn't, or we were just all the same thing.
See, I take a lot of symbolism in all of it. I don't really know if there's a literal talking snake. I I mean, we know that it's Satan, you know. It just seems like there's an awful lot of symbolism in really the early chapters of Genesis. Tower of Babel seems extremely symbolic to me as opposed to literal. And so far, anthropology's not pulling up what the story of Tower of Babel is pulling up. I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, Tower of Babel is sort of a cultural shared story, and so is the flood story, but they're local stories as well. They're not worldwide stories.
Well, that was before the people spread worldwide, but they probably used the materials for something else, and they're still trying to determine where it is, or if they can find it out, but they haven't found it yet.
What do you make of the multiple Noahs? Like there's other cultures that have the Noah story, but it's a different name, different dimensions. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a lot of stories that have the same number of people, the same story about the animals, the birds being released, and the bad people before the flood. There's a lot of similarities in many of the stories. Some of them went off on a tangent, but I think that's basically what it is a tangent. I don't think it's anything that proves anything, I don't necessarily, unless you have something specific. So
I'm kind of veering to the side where if the flood happened, it might be a localized flood as opposed to worldwide, because the world as they knew it back then was extremely small. Like they didn't have the understanding of the globe like we do now.
Right, they couldn't see the whole world for sure. But eventually they, after the 100 years, people spread out to places like, all over the place.
How do you answer the questions of incest? I know that's kind of a gross subject, but what about that? Do you think the genetic was pure, like some people argue?
Before the flood or after the flood?
Well, before the flood's one question, but let's go after the flood, even with Noah's family.
Well, there was 3 families that gave rise to all the civilizations we have today, which would be the 3 sons of Noah, and they three each had 1 wife. So that'd be 6 people that everybody came from, and there was some incest even at the time of Abraham. He married his half sister, but there wasn't so much a problem. I mean, the problem of mutations is more after the flood than before the flood. And then after the flood, there's a lot of defects in the pharaohs and stuff, in the kings, kings marrying each other and stuff. But and then that's when people started thinking, oh, maybe that's not such a good idea.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I thank you for the invite. I guess Christian Anarchist has to take off.
Yeah,
your time.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Jungle. I gotta take care of something real quick, but it was nice having the conversation with you. I did see a picture with you with your shades on, like I know what you're talking about now. Very good. Yeah. Nice shades. Now I'm jealous.
All right. Maybe I can do less with the shades next time, maybe.
All right, sounds
good.
All right,
nice talking with you guys.
Did you think that this was better than like the J.D. Kane conversation or anything?
Oh, of course, but see, my problem is with J.D. Kane and not just him, but all the atheists, is that they're slandering Christians. They're giving Christians a bad name, which gives them reason to punish and torture and persecute and to, marginalize Christians everywhere, when the Christians are the ones that are right,
Yeah, like I'll say you know, I believe God directed and guided evolution. They're like, yeah, you're on our side. I'm like, also to note, you're a sinner and you need to repent and come to Jesus Christ. And they're like, get out.
Right. There's a huge hostility there. There was a, huge hatred there. Anyway, it's been great talking with you guys, and well,
Thank-
see you soon.
All right, you too. Shalom,
All
bro.
right. Shalom. Good night. Bye.